I'm going to do both versions of the welt application. And then we're going to go over setting the pocket bags. And then we're going to end with sticking the flap in, okay? It's just an extra step. All right, so you're going to draw your box in about halfway down, okay? And after you've drawn in your box, you need to establish the positioning of your interfacing on the back side. So you can mark it any way you like. You can mark the ends of your pocket and the center of your pocket. Because remember when we made the pattern, it was an inch bigger all the way around, right? So you'll take that interfacing, yes, right? And wherever those pins are, just center it, there's the center, and then fuse the interfacing to the back, okay? So interfacing is there. Beautiful, all right. And so one application is called the folded method, and the other one is called the unfolded method, okay? So unfolded, you have your welts, but they're not pressed in half. Folded, you have your welts, and they're pressed in half with the good side showing, okay? With the folded method, you can even draw all of the seam lines in if you want. You can draw the stop and start, the little goalpost, and the 1/4 inch wide welt, okay, if that's helpful for you. This line, that's the 1/4 inch seam allowance, is the same sew line as one of these box lines, okay? And you're gonna position the welt so that the open edges are going towards each other in the center. So it'll be like this when you do both of them, all right? So it's always good if you get the first one positioned well, the second one kind of will help you get the second one positioned well. So if this line has to sew on that line, right? So you're gonna use your imaginary eyeball and see through the fabric with X-ray vision, right? And you're gonna see that this one's gonna stop right here. It's going to stop right on that stop mark for that goalpost. And then this sew line is right on that chalk sew line, correct? Okay, that's your first one. Sink your needle in, stitch, small stitch, sew all the way across, leave a long thread on both sides, okay? Then you have to sew, so this one's been done. All right, so there are my threads. I haven't even tied them off yet. All right, she's right on that chalk line. You can see it. All right, then there's my other chalk line. And I have to put my other welt. So I'm gonna pretend that this welt is not the same one. All right, again, line up the goalposts. You have to kind of pull this guy out of your way a little bit. So you get right on that chalk line. Smush her in there. Again, and different kinds of fabric, like if this was a super thick fabric, this might be really hard to do with all of this bulk in the middle. So you kind of have to let the weight of the fabric kind of help you decide which version. That should be right on the chalk line. And then your end post. Okay, all right, and again, sink in your needle, stitch all the way across. See all that bulk in the middle, kind of like that 3-line method of the buttonhole. All right, so let's pretend I've sewed it. Okay, here it is, uncut. 1/2 inch tall, corners right on top of each other, correct? Okay, and then the cutting is the same thing. You can see I took this one apart when I cut it. The cutting is the same thing, all right? You cut through the middle, but instead of having 1/4 inch triangles, you have 1/2 inch triangles, or 1/2 inch Ys, right? Okay, and then you just flip. So this one, I'm gonna pretend that I flip the welts through to the back, magic, right? And if you want to, you can baste them shut, just like with your bound buttonhole, to keep them nice and tidy, okay? After you flip them through, lift them up, sew the triangles, okay? Pretty good for the welts, make sense, yeah? The difference between the folded method and the unfolded method. For the unfolded method, you're just gonna sew through one layer of the welt versus sewing it like this, okay? Still start and stop at the same 4 3/4, 1/4 inch on the box line. But this one's a little easier because then the second welt just butts up to it. Got it? So, same thing. Or, if you remember the last method of the buttonhole, we put that patch on there and we sewed it and we flipped it and then we crimped up the welts to make the lip. You could do that as well for this buttonhole. This would all be one piece. And you would just sew here and here. Does that make sense? Make sense a little bit? Okay. All right, so same thing. You'll sew and sew. You'll double check to make sure everything is stacked 1/2 inch apart. Corner, corner. Cut your things. So instead of pulling it through with the welt already doubled, your welt's going to be created by, 1, pressing it up. Also press this one too. Pressing them up, and then you wrap that 1/4 inch to create those welt lips. Thank you. All right. So you can feel a little bit, they feel a little different too, because this one is just the fabric itself, whereas this is the seam allowance inside the welt. So this one's a little sturdier. Okay, so this guy is folded, and then this guy is folded. This is so funny that it reminds me of Halloween candy. Perfect timing here, Kate. And I'm rushing, but you guys won't be this rushy, right? You guys will take your time. Again, fold this. That should be a 1/4. Come on, be a 1/4 for me. All right? It's a fat 1/4. Pretend it's a 1/4. All right? Then again, triangle, triangle. Looks exactly the same. Feels a little different, but the look is the same. Okay? All right? All right? Now, regardless of how you do the welts, I recommend trying both of them because you have to do one with itself and one with the patch. So I'd try both of them if you like. All right? After you have your welts sewn, it's time to put the pockets on. Okay? So the first pocket you're going to put on is the pocket lining. All right? It goes to the bottom. All right? Unnotched edge. So this edge. So you're going to line the good side essentially to the good side. This is a little smaller. This is an older pocket. You're going to line up the cut edges, but you're not going to sew exactly at 1/2 inch because you don't want to sew right on that original sew line. So sew ever so slightly away from your welt line. And you don't have to use as tiny of a stitch either if you don't want to. You can go back to a slightly normal stitch. So just like an eyelash behind there. Okay? So you can either sew it from the lining side. Zipper foot helps too, or a cording foot. And you're going to sew just behind your stitch to attach those two seam allowances together. And when you flip it, you'll see that you can see the original stitch. We did it in white so you could see it, right? Okay. All right, so you'll apply the bottom pocket bag, which is the lining, press into place. All right. Then you have the pocket self, which is your pocket facing. And it's called the facing because that's the part you see when you open up the pocket. You want it to match, unless you want some kind of peekaboo thing happening. All right, there's my notch, right? So that guy's gonna match up with the pocket here. And if all the math is beautiful, it'll line up right with these cut edges of the other welt, okay? And again, you'll sew the top edge of this guy, but not exactly on your original welt stitch. Slightly shallower, okay? All right, she's in place. Now you're gonna sew the 3 sides. 1, 2, 3, okay? Now we've patterned 1/2 inch on our pockets, but it's hard to get right at 1/2 because of that triangle. So get as close as you can, or you can just do 3/8 if you're worried. So sew this side closed, and then you can sew this at 1/2 because you'll have to be easy because it's just the bottom, and then close the other side. So if you did it from here with these two, right, you're gonna sew this together, see these two? Sew that together, turn, sew here, and then sew that guy together. All right? And when you flip it over, you have the facing and the lining. All right? Now, the only difference between this one and this one is this. You sew the pocket bag lining on first, just like that. We'll pretend this is the flap, okay? You will take the flap and you'll stick the flap right into the little hole. Which is why, again, we had to make it a little smaller, although she's a lot smaller. Here, this one's better. She fits right into this one. All right? Okay? She fits right into that one. Okay? So you'll put the flap in first. And these seam allowances should line up. Flap seam allowances to pocket welt seam allowances. All right? And then you're gonna baste, you're gonna baste, so that green is the lining of the flap. You're gonna baste your pocket flap in place. That's why you see that white thread. All right? After you've basted the flap in place, then you take and make a flap sandwich. And when you flip it over, ta-da, your pocket flap is there. Okay? All right? Any questions? We didn't do we didn't sew the pocket flap, but it's in the other room. So we can just talk about that when we do the patch pocket too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.